Hey everyone, this is Enhoff. I'm one of the Great League managers for Go Stadium's meta analysts and for the Cliffhanger format. And I'm here to give some insight into the changes that went into Cliffhanger version 5.0. The most recent update before this being 4.4 back in November, and there being a ton of changes to the game since then that have really changed how Cliffhanger looks and the power of certain Pokemon that were in it. And we're going to look at a bunch of changes to like tierings of Pokemon, new introductions, and the Go Beyond update of like the power increase, the power cap increase of certain Pokemon did, the addition of new Pokemon in Kalos, and if of certain Pokemon in Unova, and what they did to the PvP scene, and the most recent update, the January 11th move update that Niantic put forward in the middle of Go Battle League Season 6, and what that affected and how things moved around from there. So I want to start out with the things that were promoted into a higher point tier. So we're going to start out with the new addition to the tier S, the 9-point tier, and that is Medicham. So Medicham was actually in the 9-point tier back in Cliffhanger 1.0, the original format. And then over time, it saw some change to Power Up Punch. It saw some competition in the meta. It saw basically a decrease in its power level as other fighters were introduced. So it was in that tier A, that 5-point tier, for quite some time. And now with the Go Beyond update, its level cap has been increased, the amount of power that it has. Literally, its CP, its combat power, has increased, and the things that has done for it in the PvP scene has pushed it back over up to that S tier, to a 9-point Pokemon. We're really excited to see, how that sees play, but at 5 points, it was really too much. Another new addition from that Go Beyond update is Wobbuffet. So, Wobbuffet still at level 51, which is like the new cap of fully powered up and best buddied. It only hits a CP of 1,174, which doesn't seem like a lot, but because of the way its stats are distributed, because of the power of counter, it is very strong in Great League, and we're putting it at that 5-point tier. Because A, it's not the most accessible Pokemon, so we don't want it to be like too budget at one point, and then B, it is actually very strong. It's very similar to Defense Deoxys, as this pure psychic type with counter. Although not quite as strong. Another Pokemon that's had its power ceiling raised is Lickitung, which we're now moving from the 0-point C tier all the way up to tier A, which is the 5-point tier. And the reasoning for this is previously Lickitung was very strong. It hit 1429 CP when you had it maxed out and best buddied. And it had a lot of very good matchups. For example, against Azumarill, it could win. It wasn't like very decisive, but it did win that matchup. Against a lot of ghosts, it was very clearly very good. And so now that the Go Beyond update has allowed it to get all the way up to 1500 CP, it does some really unexpected things, like beating Skarmory. And some other matchups that you wouldn't expect from a normal type with a Ghost Fast move, a normal and Grass type charge move, generally, with Lick, Body Slam, and Power Whip. So, again, we're pushing that up to tier A, putting it at 5 cost, just because of the strength that this Pokemon has now. And then the final Go Beyond power increase update is that we're moving Pachirisu to tier B as a 1-point selection. And that's because Pachirisu previously was very limited. It could do things at its max combat power, but it wasn't like blowing anything out of the water. Now with its increase in the cap to it, it can be comparable to those other Tier C electric types. So Cantonian Raichu, Raikou, Alolan Raichu, those kind of what we have at one point for those electric types, Pachirisu is doing similarly. Um, and for the people that have access to Pachirisu, it could be a very strong Pokemon. And we think it's just better suited at 1 point than 0. Now moving on to promotions that are more based on the January 11th move update. Politoed is going from tier C to tier A, that 0 point tier to the 5 point tier. That's because it got Weather Ball Water, which doesn't seem like a ton of power increase from Surf, but in terms of matchups, in terms of how it performs, has been a huge increase. And really puts it on a similar level to Whiscash and Swampert, which are the other kind of like spammy water types in that 5 point tier. So that's where we've decided that that kind of fits. It's a very good frog Pokemon. Alolan Ninetales we're moving from also in tier C, a 0 point pick previously, to tier B as a 1 point pick. It's very much in line with Clefable and Wigglytuff and Gardevoir in terms of like being a very serious charm user, especially now that it has access to Weather Ball as a very cheap charge move. And we're going to keep an eye on it because it does seem quite strong even at 1 point. But at the moment, the team thinks that this is, a good place for it to be. We don't want to overcost it and see no usage at 5 points. But Alolan Ninetales looks like a very strong Charmer, and it would have been a big mistake to leave it at 0 points, we feel. Also, very similar in like the same exact Pokemon is Cantonian Ninetales, and that's also moving from tier C to tier B, going from 0 points to 1 point. That also saw Weather Ball. You're going to see a trend here of Weather Ball Pokemon, and Cantonian Ninetales really has a lot of play now that it has that cheap 35 energy charge move that does a good amount of damage and really puts it on the stage of like a serious fire type, which we've only really seen from Alolan Marowak previously. And we really think that alongside its bulk, alongside the other charge moves it has, like Solar Beam, Cantonian Ninetales does have a pretty decent spot as a considerable Pokemon to add to a team. Another change to a moveset is Ember got buffed. So Sunny Castform is also moving up to tier B as a 1 point option. Very similar to Cantonian Ninetales in its moveset. Literally just Ember instead of Fire Spin if the Cantonian Ninetales is on the Solar Beam moveset. And really, again, it's this kind of trade-off in fast move from Cantonian Ninetales. It still has almost the same bulk as Ninetales does. It has that very fast-firing Weather Ball, and it has that Solar Beam pressure. We really think it's worth 1 point, along with a lot of the other Pokemon in that B tier. Now, some promotions that were based more on usage and win rate is we're moving Machamp up from tier B to tier A. Previously a 1 point Pokemon, now will be 5 points, and that's because while it did get a power reduction with Rock Slide with the change, and while Payback doesn't seem to be making a ton of waves, Machamp itself, and specifically Shadow Machamp, were. And we were seeing a ton of usage in it and a ton of win rate in it. And it was just too much of a budget pick at 1 point for your fighting type that we will be moving it up to that 5 point tier to make it just more of a team building decision to include Machamp rather than just something you throw in because you know it's strong. Similarly, we're moving Dugong and Lapras from tier B to tier A. I'm going to pair these two because they're very similar. In fact, like they had nearly identical usage rates. They had similar win rates. They are essentially a product of access, but similar roles, obviously distinct because they are different Pokemon. They have different moves that they're using, but you very clearly weren't putting both of them on your Cliffhanger team. So combined, the two of them have a lot of usage in Cliffhanger, and they both feel like they're worthy of being 5 point picks in terms of their power in PvP, in terms of what the Great League contributors thought of those two Pokemon. They're both moving up from 1 point to 5 points. And then finally, for promotions, Rainy Cast Form, Water type Cast Form is moving from Tier C to Tier B. So that's an increase from 0 points to 1 point, alongside Sunny Cast Form, really, in this update. And that's because mainly we've seen it as the most used Tier C Pokemon by a wide margin. It offered just a lot of power for 0 points, and it was just like everyone's go-to add-on to counter or to have more pressure versus Azumarill and Galarian Stunfisk, which we think is very important to have that as a cheap option. We just think it should be at one cost at this point in Cliffhanger. Now I'm going to talk about new additions to the game that we've placed into the Cliffhanger framework and where we've decided to place them and why. So the most recent that also got added on January 11th alongside the move updates is Jellicent, and that's debuting in Tier A. The reason for this is just it has a lot to offer. A lot of people are using this Pokemon already in Go Battle League, so our Great League analysts do have a good basis to pull on for its strength. And it's just a bulky water type. It's able to do good things against a lot of the Great League meta, while not being overpowering enough to be of a Tier S Pokemon or deserving of those 9 points in our opinion. But it certainly would be far too cheap at 1 point. We think 5 points at Tier A is a really nice spot for Jellicent, and we think it'll see a bunch of play at that point marker. Similarly, premiering at Tier A is Diggersby, the Pokemon added in the Kanto update, the evolution of Bunnelby. Normal ground type, and really it just offers a lot in terms of its bulk and in terms of its moveset. It does a lot of those things that you expect from something that's toting around Earthquake and a bait move, and has the bulk that Diggersby does. So similarly to Jellicent, we thought it's not quite an S tier pick, but it's certainly not a B tier pick. It's really hitting its sweet spot there in Tier A. And then finally, for new additions, Chestnut, the final evolution of Chespin, is premiering at Tier B as a 1 point option. We really like this because it is offering a answer to popular Tier S picks of Azumarill and Galarian Stunfisk, and it doesn't feel like it's overdoing it at that price point of 1 point. So Chestnut's really doing good things for the meta while also not running over a ton of neutral matchups. It's not going to be your team's carry, but it will do good things and it will offer a lot of pressure versus opposing teams. So we think it's going to fit great at 1 point in Tier B. Now for the last section of things I want to go over, we're going to look at the demotions, moving things down from a higher tier to a lower tier because of either changes to their move's power or just usage rates, reassessing. The meta analyst team really does look at, does this Pokemon seem like it's too weak for this, Tier B placing or this Tier A placing, and should it be moved down just to see if it sees more play at a cheaper tier? Do we think this is going to drastically change things, or do we think it's safe to try it out? So the first one, which I think has been a bit of a long time coming, is Probopass is being moved from Tier A to Tier B, going from a 5 point pick to a 1 point pick. This has partially um, been catalyzed by the January 11th move update because Rock Slide is very integral to Probopass's power, and that was reduced in power. But also, the time that we put Probopass in Tier A was very different in terms of what the Great League meta looked like. So better steel types have released since then, specifically ones that do very well against Probopass. And then obviously Rock Slide's been decreased in power, and some better fighting types have come out that punish Probopass even better. So we're very interested to see at one point maybe it'll get used as like a cheaper Bastiodon, because they share the same typing, they're very similar, but Bastiodon feels very much like a 5 point pick, whereas Probopass feels like it could be a 1 point pick. Similarly, Melmetal is being moved from Tier A to Tier B, going from 5 points down to 1 point as well. This one has also been a bit of catalyzed by the Rock Slide change, and, you know, again, newer steel types have come out that have fulfilled Melmetal's role while doing other things as well. So we think that at 1 point, Melmetal might pick up play again as a very cheap steel option, while not just sitting in Tier A and not seeing a ton of use. And we don't think it would be too overpowered as Tier B either, because it does have a lot of options against it, and it does have a lot of things that do its job that you can do elsewhere. Continuing on with steel types, both Bronzong and Jirachi are being moved from Tier A down to Tier B, from that 5 point tier down to that 1 point tier. Again, I'm going to repeat myself and say that newer steel types have come out, and generally Bronzong and Jirachi don't do great against those steel types. They do have a ton of strength in just their steel typing and confusion as a fast move, and that's why it's very easy to pair the two. And we feel like at 1 point they will be a great option of like a bulky confusion user, a confusion user with very good typing, while still not, outplacing Hypno, for example, in Tier A as a 5 point option, or outplacing other steel types in Tier S or Tier A as like a better form of them for 1 point. We think that these four steels, Probopass, Melmetal, Bronzong, and Jirachi, all moving down to 1 point, is going to do some interesting things for the Cliffhanger meta, and we're very interested to see how that works out and what it causes players to do. Similarly to how I mentioned earlier that Dugong and Lapras were seeing similar play, Bronzong and Jirachi have been seeing similar low level of play. And again, they're so similar that we're just grouping them together and moving them down. Two more that I want to group together are Regirock and Regice. Regirock was in Tier A at that 5 point level, and Regice was in Tier B at that 1 point level. Both of them are getting demoted. Regirock from Tier A to Tier B, so it'll be 1 point now, and Regice from Tier B to Tier C, so it'll be 0 points now. The reasoning for this, so both Regirock and Regice were quite strong when Lock-On was released, very similar to Registeel, which is still in the Tier S, 9 point tier, just because of the power of Lock-On, or rather the speed of Lock-On, and the power of their charge move options. So they did a quick wind-up to very hard-hitting moves, which I'm sure everyone knows from Registeel. The things that really did both Regirock and Regice in are, one, they don't have the stat spread that Registeel does. Registeel is a little more bulk weighted, a little less attack than the other two, which have identical stats, Regirock and Regice. And Registeel has the best defensive typing of the three. I'm pretty sure one of the earliest things people learn in the Pokemon universe is that Steel is a very good defensive typing. offers a lot of resistances, and that's part of why Registeel is just such a strong Pokemon in Great League. Whereas Regirock, Rock is not a very desirable defensive typing, doesn't offer a lot of benefits. It is nice offensively, and the fact that Regirock has a very fast firing Stone Edge is why we're not moving it to Tier C. We think it's still worth at least 1 point, and we want to see the play of it at that 1 point tier. But in terms of defense, it's nowhere near the power that Registeel has. And then Regice has one of the worst defensive typings. I think that's another thing that people learn very early on in the Pokemon universe, is that Ice only offers a resistance to itself and has quite a few weaknesses that really put Regice and Regirock to extension weak to a lot of the things that people would be using against Registeel anyway. And without the resistances that it offers elsewhere, and without necessarily the bulk that it has, they're not able to fire off as many charge moves. They just aren't offering that same lumbering behemoth kind of power that Registeel has. So we're going to try out Regirock at 1 point and Regice at 0 points and just see how it goes. Our last two demotions. So we are demoting Uxie, or Uxie. My apologies if I pronounced it wrong. Uxie is going from Tier B to Tier C, so from 1 point to 0 points. And this is kind of a long time coming thing as well. It had a role as this bulky confusion user that has play against Azumarill. A lot of its early parallels were made to Hypno, but Hypno's increased in power since then, gaining access to the elemental punches and having a shadow variant released. Whereas Uxie's kind of seen the meta take it by the wayside, and it just doesn't have the power that it needs to compete for even a 1 point slot in Cliffhanger. So as a result, we'll be moving it down to 0 points. That's all I have to say about that. It's still a very bulky confusion user, but it just doesn't have what it takes, especially now that we're moving Bronzong and Jirachi down to 1 point, to really conceivably compete for a slot there. And then finally, we're moving Togekiss from Tier B to Tier C, kind of paralleling the move up of Alolan Ninetales from Tier C to Tier B, is because really looking at Alolan Ninetales and the addition of Weather Ball made us look at all the Charmers in Cliffhanger and reassess, what are they adding to a team, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and do they fit where they currently are. So Clefable, Gardevoir, and Wigglytuff we all thought were strong enough or had options enough to stay in Tier B. Alolan Ninetales, obviously we wanted to move up to Tier B as a 1 point option, and Togekiss we thought is better suited for Tier C. It still has charm, it's still very strong, but it seemed more along the lines of Whimsicott or Granbull in terms of the power that it provides, of the matchups that it might gain or lose over the other charm users, and where it might fit best. And again, I think Togekiss was put in Tier C, or in Tier B initially, because of just the power of charm, the option that it gave, and I think also a little bit because of the kind of like accessibility, not wanting to give it too much of a benefit to those who had a Great League Togekiss. But now, there's been adjustments to the league, there's been increases in power in multiple Pokemon, and again, most notably Alolan Ninetales, and Togekiss just wasn't seeing any play at 1 point, and doesn't seem like it really fits in with those other Charmers of Clefable, Wigglytuff, Gardevoir, and now Alolan Ninetales. So we will be moving that from Tier B to Tier C as a 0 point option. Thank you so much for tuning into this. I'm really glad that I was able to share all of these changes, and I'm really excited to see how this new Cliffhanger meta progresses. Obviously, we'll all be keeping an eye on how it goes and what people are using in their Go Stadium Cliffhanger tournaments. And we'll continue to adjust from there going forward. Obviously, we're at version 5 now, but I'm very excited to see how this meta looks and just the diverse teams that we see out of Cliffhanger, because that's just the beauty of the format, in my opinion. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.